You're nervous when there's not bike lanes. At least I was. Someone dings you from behind, and we have to do everything we can to make sure there's never a death in the city. One death is way too many when it comes to bicycle riders. We have to make sure that they're safe. And I felt so much safer when it was separated.
That was the Premier of Ontario and wannabe Mayor of Toronto, Doug Ford, extolling the virtues of bike lanes in a clip that has been mysteriously hard to find lately on YouTube. And the reason for this video is that earlier this week, on Monday, November 25th, it is, I think, Thursday the 28th as I record this, the Ontario government passed Bill 212, disingenuously named the Reducing Gridlock Saving Your Time Act, by a vote of 66 to 27. And I say disingenuously because this bill is not really about that, and it certainly won't reduce any gridlock, nor will it save you any time. So today, I'm taking a break from the usual walking videos and tours around Toronto, but rest assured, things will be back to normal in the near future. So if this isn't your cup of tea, I get it. It's not normally what I do on the channel. Go ahead and skip it. This one's going to be a little bit off the cuff, but I just wanted to sort of react to this bill and how it will impact us here in the city. I normally don't get that political on the channel. I try to stay neutral. Everyone is certainly entitled to their own opinion and own beliefs, but this one hits a little too close to home, and it's kind of hard not to speak up about it. So I want to talk a little bit about what this bill is, what it means to those of us that live in the city, as well as what we can do about it moving forward. And the 3 bike lanes at the heart of the issue, but there's definitely going to be more existing ones impacted and more that will be removed, are the ones on University Avenue, on Yonge Street, as well as Bloor Danforth, which you've probably seen a whole lot of in this channel. If you want to know more about Bill 212, a bill which is really a vehicle to allow the province to plow ahead with building an unnecessary highway, one that it will no doubt sell off to private interest and then toll the hell out of anyone wanting to use it, just like they did with Highway 407. You can find out more about that in Ben Durham's excellent video titled, "What This Government is Hiding in Plain Sight." There's a link to that down below in the description. Although Ben might have to revisit and update the topic, as since he made that video, a whole host of nasty amendments have been made to the bill, such as taking away the right of an injured cyclist or the family of a deceased cyclist to sue the government for accidents occurring where protected bike lanes were once provided, or possibly where the city had approved them but they never went in, which is pretty much an admission of guilt by the province that this will no doubt lead to an increase in deaths and catastrophic injuries. I don't know how else to say it. And also the province is walking back their previous statements, as this bill could force municipalities to pay for the removal of the bike lanes that they paid to put in. So I just want to talk a little bit about why removing these bike lanes is going to have a disastrous effect on the city. But first, we need to talk a little bit about the human thumb that is Doug Ford. One thing that's impossible not to notice about Doug Ford is he can't seem to hide his pathetic 1-inch little hate boner for the city of Toronto he's had ever since he ran for mayor in 2014 and lost. And this was after his brother, the previous mayor of Toronto, was made world famous for all the wrong reasons. Doug later ran for provincial premier, and upon winning, one of his first acts was to slash the size of Toronto City Council from 47 to 25 seats. This was to trim the fat, so to speak, something he obviously has little experience in. Still, you might naturally expect him to follow suit with other large cities in the province, except that he didn't. For example, the city of Ottawa has 1/3 the population of Toronto, and yet they have just one fewer city councillor than Toronto. So they have 24, Toronto has 25. Toronto is 3 times larger and vastly more complex. Trying to make sense of that. So while this video is mostly just me complaining about the bike lanes, Doug's also done some other pretty horrible things in the city of Toronto, such as turning Ontario Place into a private spa and spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build a parking lot for that private spa. Also claiming that somehow the newly revamped Ontario Place is going to get more annual visitors than the CN Tower and become a top tourist destination in Canada. He's closed down the Science Center unnecessarily. There's architects and engineers on record stating that wasn't necessary, and a whole number of good citizens offering to pay for the repairs. But nope, it was closed down. We'll have to pay close attention to see where that land, or whose hands that land ends up in, especially after the Greenbelt scandal. And, well, there's a whole lot more on those topics, but it's basically never ending with this guy. So Bill 212 aims to make changes to Toronto's bike lanes, potentially removing existing ones and blocking future bike lanes in favor of car-focused infrastructure. It's being framed as a way to reduce traffic congestion and put drivers first. On the surface, it might sound like a win for drivers, but removing bike lanes doesn't solve congestion. It actually makes it worse. In a nutshell, creating more space on the roads for cars is kind of like fighting obesity by purchasing looser pants and a larger belt. You're just going to end up filling up all that extra space, and things are ultimately going to be far worse than where you started. And that'll certainly be true in this case as well, with the added bonus of more cyclist deaths and injuries. Yay. There's countless videos on YouTube that discuss the principle of induced demand. I'll link to a few of them down below, but some of my favorite ones were done by City Nerd and Not Just Bikes. So in a nutshell, if you build more space for cars, more people choose to drive, and you end up with more congestion than what you had when you started, as well as higher road maintenance costs. And again, with the added bonus of more pedestrian and cyclist deaths and injuries. One of the reasons why I'm so for having bike lanes in the city is that they save lives, period. End of discussion. They reduce the risk of accidents for everyone, cyclists, pedestrians, and even drivers. And it's a statistically proven fact that cities with protected bike lanes see fewer collisions and injuries. Removing them means more people riding in traffic, and that's something most drivers and cyclists don't want to contend with. And to touch on a common myth that says bike lanes cause traffic, the truth, bike lanes move much more people using much less space. A single bike lane can carry 5 times as many people as a car lane. Plus, bike lanes mean more people choose bikes over cars, and that reduces congestion for everyone. The same logic applies to transit vehicles as well. In fact, cars take up an enormous amount of space for transporting so few people. What's even worse is many of the bike lanes being removed will simply be replaced by on-street parking, which makes this entire thing seem so idiotic. There's also countless studies from cities all around the world, including this one, that show bike lanes boost local economies. Cyclists are more likely to stop and shop at local businesses, as numerous studies show that streets with bike lanes see increased retail sales. In fact, the Bloor Annex BIA, which represents the businesses along Bloor Street in the Annex neighborhood, is strongly opposed to removing the bike lanes.
As the Ford government takes aim at several bike lanes across the city, store owners in the Annex are speaking out, saying that this cycling infrastructure along Bloor has actually been a big boost to business.
After pedestrians and walk-up, people arriving on bicycles to shop at our store far surpass any other method of transportation.
And let's not forget the savings. Cycling reduces healthcare costs by promoting fitness and reducing pollution-related illnesses. If the bike lanes were removed on Bloor, Yonge, and University, we're not just taking away space from cyclists. We're making Toronto less safe, less healthy, and less connected. It sends a message that our city isn't serious about moving forward with positive change or creating equitable transportation options for everyone. It's also true that not everyone can afford a car. For many, bikes are the most affordable, accessible way to get around. Removing bike lanes disproportionately hurts these groups while catering to a car-centric system that simply doesn't work in the long run. But ultimately, the province's decision to remove our bike lanes is based on nothing but bullshit. They've done no cost analysis, they've done no studies. They're simply appealing to those with caveman mentalities who think cyclists bad, me driver, me good. Let's get them out of my way and off the streets. If the province were serious, they'd come to the table with data and facts in hand, not flimsy anecdotal experiences and evidences of people saying, hey, I don't see anyone riding bikes in the wintertime. What a waste. Or my favorite is when people say nobody uses them 8 months a year. Have you ever been in the city? Have you ever looked at our bike lanes in the winter? They are plenty well used. And if they were better maintained and better connected, they would be used even more. There was maybe 4 or 5 days all of last year where I would say the bike lanes nearest me, which are south of Yonge and Davisville, were unrideable. So that is not an argument. In fact, speaking of being disingenuous, Doug put out this tweet yesterday, and he kind of missed one important detail. When Toronto traffic is so bad that NHL teams have to walk to their games, we've got a serious problem. That's why it's so important that we deliver on our plan to fight gridlock by bringing sanity back to bike lane decisions, building highways and public transit, and speeding up construction on the Gardiner. That tweet was a response to the Utah Hockey Club having to get out and walk their way to Scotiabank Arena for a game with the Maple Leafs. And Doug makes it seem like the bike lanes were to blame. But you know what Doug left out of that tweet? The fact that the Santa Claus Parade was held just hours earlier, a major event that saw multiple road closures, and many of those streets were still closed as the Utah Hockey Club were making their way to the arena. And Doug talks about expediting construction on the Gardiner. Well, how about expediting construction on the Crosstown LRT or the Finch LRT Line 6, I think it's called? Or how about just speeding up and properly funding transit in the city in general? No, it's all about the automobile and getting drivers through the city faster with no regard for anyone else. And that is pretty much Doug Ford in a nutshell. One thing I haven't yet touched on is the fact that this bill is an example of egregious government overreach. We elect our city councilors to take care of our local roads and make decisions on where and when to install bike lanes. Nobody elects a premier of a province to do that. And even though, just like the province and the feds, Toronto is plenty capable of screwing things up and wasting money on its own. For example, the renaming of Yonge Dundas Square, which was done with virtually zero public consultation, and then they chose a name that sounds like a cheap instant coffee, one that was widely panned and rejected by the general public, a name with not only no connection to the city, but one with a strong connection to a society that openly promotes hate. And it will do absolutely nothing to make anyone's life in Toronto any better. I could go on. It's that bad. But it's our job as citizens to remember these misdeeds the next time we go to the voting polls. Politicians, like most people, need to stay in their lane and do what we elect them to do. And nobody in this province elected Doug Ford to weigh in on the status of bike lanes in this city. Sadly, ghost bikes are a growing presence in the city of Toronto. And thanks to our Premier Doug Ford, Bill 212 will not lead to a reduction in traffic congestion, but it will sure lead to an increase in the number of ghost bikes, as well as those suffering life-altering injuries. This is the intersection of St. George and Bloor Street, where in 2018, a grandmother tragically lost her life as a turning flatbed truck operator didn't bother to check for cyclists. Since then, the city has looked into and finally painstakingly reconfigured the intersection into the first Dutch-style intersection in the city of Toronto. And sadly, just a few blocks to the east of this spot, several cyclists were killed by motorists recently, including 2 this year. But of course, Doug Ford doesn't care about that. As long as he can build his highway and stick it to Toronto, he's happy. There will no doubt be countless rolling protests throughout the city, enormous delays for everyone as construction slows traffic down to a crawl to remove the bike lanes. And once they're done, the streets will be full of cyclists like me, legally taking the full lane. And perhaps not going as fast as we could because, well, if the province takes away our safe place to ride, we're just going to end up riding on the streets, and most drivers and cyclists aren't going to like that. So I'm going to end the video right here and promise not to make another one like this because, like Doug Ford, I need to stay in my lane as well and do what I do best, and that is not rant and rave about government policies. But I'll just leave it at this. If Doug Ford gave two shits about reducing congestion in the city, he'd expedite the opening of the Crosstown LRT. He'd increase TTC funding and expand service. He'd expedite the city's plans to add more bike routes. And perhaps most importantly, he would ban on-street parking on major corridors. But he's not doing any of that because he actually doesn't care. And sadly, we're all going to pay a very big price for this. Stay safe, guys.